Some time ago, a former American president once said that America should be a place where people can come from all over the world to bring their individuality, their hard work, their creativity, and their ingenuity to build a better life for others, as well as themselves, to realize their success, and to make America a shining city on the hill. With the looming threat of rent control hovering over the horizon, many property owners wonder what will happen to the American dream. Will we still have a shining city on the hill, or will our communities be cast under a cloud of darkness? Today, we're going to hear from a group of panelists who come from diverse communities and immigrant backgrounds. These are the small mom and pop property owners who provide over 60% of the rental housing in Boston and throughout Massachusetts. Many of their businesses are female, minority, and family owned. We're going to hear their perspectives. And as we proceed with our conversation today, in the words of one of our panelists, can we really come up with solutions for a better future without learning from the lessons of the past? Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to episode 4 of our series about housing policy and property rights, brought to you by the Small Property Owners Association, also known as SPOA. My name is Amir Shahsavari. I'm the vice president of SPOA. And today, I'm happy to introduce Mr. Melvin Vieira, who is the past president of the Greater Boston Association of Realtors. He's a real estate agent working with RE/MAX Destiny, and he's been in the business for over 34 years. Melvin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for SPOA for doing this.
It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. We also have Miss Marita Palavicini. Marita is a property owner. She has experience in the banking industry. She was also the former vice president of a local chamber of commerce. And it was also her birthday recently. And Melvin's birthday is coming up pretty soon as well.
And today's your birthday too. Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday, man.
It's also my birthday today. So we're a number of us here, we're a group of Libras. So
yes,
that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We have also Mr. Jason Pan, who is the president of the Boston Asian Landlord Association. Jason, thank you for making it today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Our pleasure. And we have Mr. Demetrios Salpoglou. Demetrios is the CEO of Boston Pads. He's a property owner. He's a broker. He's an incredible advocate in the area of housing. And he's always a pleasant constant on this panel. He also adjusted his vacation schedule to be with us. So Demetrios, we appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Well, today we're going to be focusing on immigrant and minority property owners and how rent control and other dangerous policies affect them, along with other people in the business. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to please donate to the Small Property Owners Association. You can do this by going to www.spoa.com/join. In previous conversations, we've outlined the different threats that the rent control proposal presents to us. We've talked about how it stunts the production of housing, thereby bringing expenses up. We've talked about how it makes it harder for owners to collect their hard-earned rental income, how it leads to the disrepair of housing, and how it makes it more difficult to manage non-cooperative tenants to the detriment of not only the owners and the properties, but the other tenants who do cooperate. We also know that it's going to have a very negative impact on the average taxpayer because their taxes are going to go up. The needed balance is missing. We don't often hear about all the expenses that are rising for property owners. We typically hear about how tenants are struggling with higher rents, but property owners do have a lot of operating costs. In the past, we've talked about property insurance, property taxes, mortgage, the costs of labor for all the tradespeople, but there's also more to it than that. You know, we don't always have time to go into it in detail, but we are going to spend time talking about that as well in greater detail today. So I just want to remind everybody to please donate. Once again, you can go to SPOA.com/join. I'll move it to, I'll pass it on to Melvin. If you have any comments, and if you could tell us a little bit more about what you've seen in different communities with regard to these challenges.
Well, there's been a lot of challenges, and there's been a lot of conversations from different levels within the industry, especially where I sit, being the past president, but I also sit on the board of directors of the Greater Boston Association, Greater Boston Real Estate Board. And we have conversations with the big boys who've been and they're afraid of what it could do. Also, has stifled them from wanting to build or do any more. What we've realized is that, especially in my industry today, that we have a lack of housing, and we're also realizing that a lot of the developers who were here in the city of Boston, a lot of them have run outside of Boston to areas hoping that rent control won't go there either, but under the auspice that there's not going to go there. So we're seeing that happen. But we also realize is that, and then I was just reading something, and it's funny. People don't realize with rent control that once the number's there for whatever the tenant's paying, the owner is going to say, I got to repair this. I'm not going to repair it to that level or put a brand new faucet in. I'm going to find a faucet that's comparable that works, but I'm not going to put the best in the house because they're trying to cut down their expenses. So it comes down to now the tenant could be suffering in a way because they're not getting the best of the best what they should get, because the landlord is trying to look at their costs and their overhead. And you know, I always say to everybody, we think about the immediate gratification, that silver bullet, that bullet that's going to solve it right then and there. But we don't think about the long-term effects of what's going to happen later on down the road. Sounds good today. But if you don't, and this is the thing, I'm going to leave this last thing, I'm going to just pass it off to Demetrios, because I know he has a lot to say as well about this. But this the thing is, if you do not know your past, you will not know your future. And understand, rent control was here once before. Rent control failed. It was voted out. And people don't even also realize that rent control ballot was brought up twice in Cambridge. First time it went out, and then it was brought back again, and it failed in Cambridge again. So understand, the public has spoken in the past. Those people have gotten older, and they've aged out, and a lot of them have passed away. But if they were here today, they'd probably tell you it was not a good idea then. So why is it a good idea now? The best way to solve it is to build more property.
To build more property, well said. And before we pass it to Demetrios, I think if I'm correct, in 2003, the voters of Cambridge had an opportunity to bring rent control back, and it was defeated by a margin of 61% to 39%. After people had a chance to experience how much better things got after rent control was banned in 1994. And so, Demetrios, along the lines of what Melvin was saying, I just wanted to put something else out there, especially related to the immigrant experience. There was a former president, I believe it was Ronald Reagan, some time ago, who said that America should be a place where the gates are open to people from all over the world who want to come here to bring their hard work, their creativity, and their ingenuity to benefit others along with themselves, to realize success, and to make this country a shining city on the hill. Now, just to be clear, Reagan was a Republican. In SPOA, we have both Republicans, Democrats, and independents among us. So that's not a political advertisement. It was just, you know, a very beautiful speech delivered by one of our former presidents. But in your experience, given that I believe you're a first-generation immigrant yourself, where do you think that dream is now, given everything that's going on and what you've seen, tying into what Melvin was saying as well?
Well, I think so far everything that everyone on the panel has had to is on point, and I think Melvin brings it right into dead center and focuses it. And really, if we look at the American dream, if I look at my database of over 17,000 landlords, small landlords, medium-sized landlords, large landlords, it is such a wide swath of different names, cultures. It's amazing. If you go through my database, and I invite any of you guys to just come in and look. I mean, actually, Jason's seen my database, so he can tell you it is the American dream personified.
Exactly.
Now, it's that full stop right there. And you get to, I have the incredible opportunity each day to talk to the widest array, widest diverse group of landlords all across the greater Boston area, and our first generation immigrants. A lot of them are immigrants that have gotten here part of their American property because they didn't have property rights in other countries at all. And even if they did have property rights, they had a lot of strings attached to it. Like they couldn't own the land property, or they could kind of own the land, but they had to live there. So there were a bunch of different attached to being a property owner, and came because they wanted to own property without the excessive regulations of government. Now, I think when most people to just come to another country is a challenge in and of itself, right? But to come here, most of them, I believe, came because they wanted less government, not more. They had this, they could do than what they were currently experiencing at their country, because why else would they come, right? For the most part, right? So they come here, and I talk to them about their stories, because I love understanding people's stories when they come here. And what they tell me is that they love the ability to build for their future, for their family, for their future generations. But what they didn't know that was here was the amount of excessive rules, regulations, and laws. And so, when they're at a different country, they go, oh, that's the shining city on the hill. Or in our case, it might be the not so shiny apartment on the hill, if this keeps going, right, with rent control and other things. But we're talking about thousands of laws that are passed every single year. And let me tell you who's at a disadvantage when all those thousands of laws that are passed that we don't know about every single year, whether it's by a bureaucrat that doesn't own property, whether it's by a local city official, a politician, locally, state, federal, it keeps adding to the complexity. And I believe that immigrant landlords are they're disproportionately affected in a negative manner, because I remember, my dad, when he was alive, reading stuff and even asking me, hey, what does this mean exactly? And I think it goes back to what Jason's talking about. There's so much verbiage, and the verbiage is difficult to understand. It's difficult for me to understand sometimes. It's written by this high-priced lawyer, and you have to read it 4 times. You're like, what does this mean? And what's the impact of it? And I think that we're making it difficult for people. And then I think, to Maria's point, that's even if you can find the material to read, and then you have to understand it. And then you might have to call your lawyer friend and ask them, him or her, hey, what does this mean? And so I don't think any immigrant embarks on a journey and says, yeah, I want to come to America and build my empire, and then get litigated to death or lawyered to death. Or we spend thousands of dollars each year to look over our addendums to make sure that we're giving landlords a proper addendums. I mean, Jason knows this at a personal level, right? And then they change all the time, to his point, right? So then a law is passed, we don't know about it, we got to add it to the addendum, and that's a tax. I'm sorry, you can call it anything you want, but it is a tax on the American dream, because now someone has to spend time, and they're hardworking families. Immigrants come and they work hard, they just do, and they just get it done. They're here and they want to get it done, and then you're adding another couple hours to it. So really, you're slowing down the American dream, or you're making it more difficult. And then I think, to the point of the pandemic part, yeah, a lot of landlords were negatively affected by that, for sure, small, medium, large alike, and it did favor the tenants. And I don't think there was proper representation. I think the last part of that, I'm sorry, I have a lot to say about this, but I think when you have these panels, and they're talking about what would impact, or rent control. They're not including, to Melvin's point, they're not there. There are still a lot of landlords that are still alive, Melvin. A lot of them have passed away from previous, but there are still a lot of alive. I didn't see any of them on any of those panels. They're not reaching back to those authorities that had rent control back then, right, Melvin? And I've listened to those stories and they're horrifying. They're absolutely horrifying. And so I do think that, when they form these groups, we're going to form this expert panel. They should be reaching out to the widest group available and not just, group speak in an echo chamber. It really has to be, a much wider group to understand all impacts of how that affects people, both in the, local community, the immigrants, and how it's going to affect business in general. So those are my thoughts.
Demetrios, you touched on so many beautiful points. And I just want I want everybody to fathom this, who's listening to this. We are short 5.5 million homes in this whole country. Short now. So let's just back up here and let's think about this for a second. If we're short those many homes, have we had a population that has exploded? Because think about this now. The baby boomers were the largest population. But now the largest population is actually the millennials. The millennials are in the market to buy. But we have to understand and remember this, that the millennials are trying to buy, the baby boomers aren't going anywhere. And the baby boomers' parents are still alive, living in those houses, and they're living in 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom homes. So the reason why we have such a shortage is because we never built to accommodate for the population. So if we would learn to change the rules and regs, okay, and open up zoning restrictions and create more housing, we could actually get ourselves out of this problem. And that number I gave you came from Lawrence Yun from the National Association of Realtors. So that came from the chief economist that the Congresses and the state Senate has had him testify in front of them in regards to this issue, this housing issue. I say all this is that this housing issue is created because we did not do what we were supposed to do in the very beginning, okay, or over time. Yes, you may see building happening now, but we also have to understand, remember, if you go up and down, especially here in Boston or even outside Boston, and you see an empty lot, at one point, I guarantee you there probably was a house on that lot.
100%.
We just never replaced that house. So when you replace that house, where do those people go? Outside of the city. Now everybody wants to come back in the city. Everybody wants to be here because transportation, traveling is taking people hours to go back and forth on the road, and they're spending 2 and 3 hours in the car to go to work. So I understand the plight and I understand what's going on, but we have to change our zoning to do certain things. And I wanted to bring up another piece real quick. And you talk about the American dream, Demetrios, and Jason and Maria. But there's a story that Amir and I had a conversation about, which was about the American dream started within his family. And it really touched me when he told the story. And I think it needs to be told again because you really understand, what Dimitri and Marita and Jason are talking about. But this gentleman, and not saying you all don't have the same story, but his story was just amazing. So if you don't mind sharing, Amir, that story real quick, I appreciate it. And maybe
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And I do remember our conversation. So my mother was an immigrant. She came to the United States with my dad in 1970. And she loved America. And she wanted to live the American dream. And she thought that the best way to do that and to give back to her new country was to provide her new fellow citizens, her fellow Americans, with housing. She wanted to give back to America by becoming a housing provider. And so that's why she went into the business, and she worked very hard. She didn't come to America with a lot of money, but she knew how to save money. And this is common, with Demetrios and the rest of you. She worked very hard at it, and she purchased rental property. She treated her tenants like family. She was always giving them gifts during the holidays. She treated them like her children. And they would reciprocate back. And so she developed a lot of special friendships. You know, if they needed something at, 2 a.m, they would call her. She was always there for them. And I think a lot of us can say that, and you don't hear this too often. And another thing that she did, she would try to help her tenants find a pathway to home ownership. And so eventually, when her tenants were ready to move on to become homeowners themselves, to buy condos of their own or to buy homes of their own, their parents couldn't always afford to co-sign the purchase agreement. So my mother would step forward to co-sign those agreements for them and to give them support. She couldn't always do it, but when she could afford to do so, she was very eager. And her tenants appreciated it greatly. They would send her gifts and thank you cards every year. And over time, those tenants went on to become caring housing providers themselves. And so that was my mother's way of passing the positive energy forward, if you will. And I think that's a good segue to talk about how we can possibly help tenants on their pathway to home ownership. I'll bring that up a little bit later. Regardless, she got hit by rent control. She got hit pretty hard. And when she wanted to rehab her building, when she wanted to improve the bathrooms and the kitchens and the plumbing, the rent control attorneys were supposed to be there to supposedly protect the tenants. But what they ended up doing, they ended up preventing her. They tried to prevent her from making those renovations for the tenants' sake. And this goes back to the 80s when AIDS was new. Nobody knew how the AIDS virus was spread. And she was running a rooming house that only had one bathroom in it. And for safety and hygiene purposes, she wanted to renovate the building in such a way so that each apartment would have its own bathroom. And so the rent control attorneys took her to court and they sued her on the basis that she was trying to do a condo conversion. And so when the judge requested to see the plans and the blueprints, he quickly saw that that wasn't the case. And that's not a crime, by the way. But in any case, he saw what her intent was. And he said, young lady, go and do it. You have my blessing. And so she was just very disheartened by that the system would actually prevent her from doing something good for her tenants and her property. And at the same time, she found herself with one particular tenant who ended up not paying rent for 20 years. She could not evict him from the property. The other good tenants in the building ended up moving out because he was harassing them and threatening them. He would take an axe and make holes in the walls. He would destroy the balustrades on the staircase. He deliberately flooded the building 2 times on 2 different years during the winter by manipulating the burner in the basement. And even though my mother had evidence to prove that she did maintain the burner and that the damage was caused by the tenant, the judge automatically sided with the tenant. The tenant sued my mother for tens of thousands of dollars, which she had to borrow. She had to find a way to pay for all that. I mean, this was really a case of extortion. So she had to borrow money from friends to pay an unfair judgment while not receiving a penny in rent for 20 years in a situation where the tenant had taken over the building because he scared everybody else away. So he was one tenant who had the whole building to himself. And she had to endure that. She had to endure repairing the sidewalk, for example, because water was seeping into the basement. The city would not step forward to pay for it. So as a new immigrant from another country, she paid out of her own pocket to repair the sidewalk that the city was supposed to maintain for the good of the public. And fortunately, she was tough. She got through it. It did not ruin her optimism. She still loved America. She still wanted to provide people with housing. Rent control ended, and she was able to rescue her business. She was able to put more money back into her building. She was able to find good tenants who appreciated what she was doing. And I ended up with that building. It was passed down to me. And because of what she went through, I treat my tenants like gold the way that she did. And I've done my utmost best to keep the building in pristine shape better than she ever could. And as a child, I remember what she went through, how the American dream was robbed from her during rent control. And so that's why when I talk to people, even though I might be somewhat younger than a lot of rental property owners out there, I am a rent control child. I remember what she went through. I remember what it did to her. I've heard what it's done to others through various other abuses encountered by rent control attorneys or the rent control boards. And what I learned quickly was that the whole goal was to depreciate the quality and the value of housing just so a group of third parties could reap benefit from that. The tenants were used as pawns. It was never about tenant rights. And the landlords, the rental housing providers, were stigmatized because of it. So it is a nightmare. It's a violation of the American dream. And that's what that story brings out. It's very personal for me, really. So that's the story.
I have one other question to everybody, and anybody can answer this, is that, and I know, Amir, you're the moderator here, but there's a question I have, is that most small landlords, are they getting rich off their properties, or are they just maintaining and putting a little bit of money in their pocket?
We can jump in on that one. So if you look at our database, it works out to when you take over 17,000 landlords and you divide it by the aggregate number, it works out to about, the average landlord has about 8 units. That is not enough for anybody to retire on. That's in other words, that is a supplement to their already hardworking. They're trying to build something, and they're probably looking at that property, because I know I've talked to quite a few of them, as something that they may sell when their kids go to college or use it to refinance to pay for college. It's a supplemental income to retire them while they work. So it doesn't replace work. It is in addition to, which means they have 2 jobs. And so the landlord's always at a disadvantage to, a casual politician that rallies a cause to a certain ideological endeavor, rather than looking at the facts. And they work hard here most of the time with not that much, and they're working all their way up to buy their first property or a couple properties so they can build a nest egg to start supplementing so that they can integrate into society. And that's how I look at it. And so they're working 2 jobs, Melvin. That's what I see. They're working as a landlord, which is another part-time job, and also their jobs. And some of their jobs are really hard, restaurants, et cetera, 7 days a week, dry cleaners. They're putting it in. And so I think they're taxed on both ends of the equation.
Man, did you hear what he just said? He said they're working 2 jobs.
Sometimes
Marita,
3.
Jason, sometimes 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they think
I would say a majority of the landlords I know, they work 7 days a week.
Yes.
and
Then it's the night, sometimes after work, 7 after dinner, tenants will call, things happens, you have to be there. And that's a responsibility no one can or will pick up. Now, plumbers are not responding, electricians, handymen, they don't work, but the owner has to respond. Whether they need to go to work tomorrow or not in the morning.
But Jason, you just said something. They got to call plumbers, electricians, right, to do something. And Marita, so hold on. So does their prices ever go down, or do their prices?
Oh, no, absolutely not. And as a matter of fact, when we get those calls from tenants, they're very demanding. They want things done right away. I got into trouble with special services because their tenant was overusing the electricity during the summer. They had high-powered ACs in every single room. And whenever the electricity went out, they wanted us to be there within an hour. And it was impossible. I mean, we have a life too. So, the one done immediately, and then they have those tenant organizations that they can go to that give them advice. They go inspectional services, and they give them advice too. So we have several parties working against us, and it's very challenging.
Yes.
Melvin, I remember hearing, years ago, and I'm sure I can open up to the whole group, but people used to say, "Oh, I'm worried about labor not making enough." I do not hear that anymore, ever. I've never met a broke plumber or a broke electrician or so I think that, there's always a good side and a bad side to everything, right? We know that people in the trades industry are making money, but they're facing the same inflationary pressures. And I think, you mentioned Lawrence, and I'm pretty spirited about Lawrence over I read all the time, we need to get our energy costs down to really, because I love the guy, but he doesn't put enough information on energy, to be quite honest with you. I think if we have to look at lowering our energy costs, so that, because construction is so energy heavy, and we're not being honest enough about fossil fuels. And I think that's an issue, that if we can get the energy prices down, we can get a lot more construction done, which can then ultimately result in more affordability, because it is a supply issue for sure at the end of the day.
So real quick, and I'm going to just, Amir, but I'm really amazed, right, is that we're all talking about how it's costing more money. So if you keep the rents at a certain price, but the cost of everything continues to go up. And I'm gonna have you guys laugh in a second, because if you guys know how to reach a plumber or electrician today, then let me know, because they're impossible to find nowadays, because we have a lack of people in the trades. But that's a whole nother story that we can go into.
Right.
So if you can help me do that, I think we're all be happy.
That's true. That's true.
But what I'm just saying is that, so if the cost stays here, to rent the places here, but everything else keeps going up, what are the choices people are going to have to make?
That's what it comes down to, and that's what a lot of people need to realize. We're not just sitting back passively collecting rent checks and then going to, for a vacation to Hawaii or somewhere. I mean, there was the surprise. Really? No. There was a statistic, I think, from the National Apartment Association that said for every $1 that an owner collects in rent, only 9 cents goes to the owner and the rest goes to expenses. And I'm sure there are a lot more stats like that. I think we should start getting into the habit of feeding people numbers more regularly. But when it comes to the minority and immigrant owners, although as a group we have properties in different places, and yes, the costs, the operating expenses have gone up, it is true that in lower income neighborhoods, you probably have a higher percentage, you likely have a higher percentage of immigrant and minority property owners who have to operate already on much tighter budgets. And therefore, I think it would be reasonable to say that if rent control did pass, those vulnerable owners would be the first ones to suffer. And, Jason, I don't know if you can, or Marita, I mean, this is a question for all of you. With the exposure you've had to people in those neighborhoods in particular, have they been talking to you about their frustrations and their fears?
If I could just add to the Melvin's cost issue. It's not just the upfront cost. A few years ago, when you call the plumber, they would on top of the bill they would add a fuel charge. And then we all know the condo associations have the reserve. Not every dollar that the landlord makes can spend. They have to have their own reserve as well. If anyone who's doing the lending, the landlord cannot keep everything and spend everything. When they are to be approved, they need to have the percentage of the income, the net operating income reserved for unknown issues. So that adds to the amount of dollar that really the owner can use to be ready for the unforeseeable future that may be flooding here, emergency call here or there, and that's really reduced the available revenue that a landlord can use.
But the thing is that there's a lot of meetings, the language and things like that, but we're not being included in those meetings. No one is listening to us. For instance, that the City of Boston Rent Stabilization Committee, 25 members, and you don't have not one landlord association in that committee. Why is that? How is that possible? Where's the transparency that the city requests from the police and other departments, and they're not transparent at all? Huh? Why aren't they held accountable for that? I don't know. Well, and that's just coming up, so we're gonna make some changes.
I agree with that, because many years ago, I remember we invited we showed to our seminar. I told them that for the minority property owners, we are the minority of the minorities, and we are widely misunderstood, but at least represented.
What was her response to you, Jason?
At the time, she was just starting to be running for the mayor. Before she became the mayor, so she was quite neutral at the time. She was, mainly trying to present herself to everybody so we get to know her.
Well, we know that she was against it before she was for it, which is interesting. We also know that this proposal, the one put forth for the ballot question, includes TOPA, tenant opportunity to purchase, also referred to as tenant right of first refusal. And, we tell people if rent control essentially ties your hands from managing your property properly, TOPA, if passed, would prevent you from selling it at a fair price. And does anybody want to talk about that and the concerns that people have about that? Also, with regard to the effects and restrictions that it could have on condo conversion and other things.
I can speak to the TOPA piece to a point. DC actually has that in place. And they've had their struggles with it. Right now I don't recall the exact struggles, and I don't want to fabricate anything, but I do know they've had their struggles. I understand the tenant, the tenant always has the right to buy the property.
Right.
Mhm. Right.
The property goes on the market, the tenant has the right. So I don't see the disadvantage personally, being a real estate agent for over 30 years, because I've actually helped tenants buy properties that they live in, and I can literally say that. So I'm trying to figure out why that needs to be put in. If they want to go get a grant from someplace and they may know of someone who may want to partner with them to buy it, then so be it. But I don't think the landlord, and this is me personally, I'm not speaking for the association, I'm speaking for me as a real estate agent, I don't think a landlord should be restricted for the type of wealth that they could receive and pass down to their children or anybody else within their family. And someone has to tie their hands to that, because that is called generational wealth. And if that's why the country was established, or why people did things, is because they wanted to create generational wealth. Why are we holding them back from doing that?
Very good point. Yeah.
And I think in DC, less than 5% of the tenants in DC ended up purchasing the properties that they were renting. It did not help the tenants once again. And it only made life more difficult for the owners who were trying to sell. It made it more difficult for the average buyers who were trying to invest, because when they delayed the process of the sale, the buyers would pull out, the tenants ultimately would pull out too, and then the property would go back onto the market, and the same vicious cycle would start all over again until the owners eventually caved, and until they eventually were willing to sell their properties at values that were drastically lower. And so, I mean, to their credit, I think in Massachusetts, the proponents have tried to make several revisions. But Melvin, just based on what you said, you can't just take a pig and keep putting lipstick on it. I mean, when an idea is fundamentally bad and wrong, it's a bad idea. And there should be other ways, other pathways to help tenants achieve home ownership, as opposed to trying to implement a disaster like TOPA. And that leads to another thought. When we sat down for episode 1 some time ago, I asked a question about what the panel thought about a certain idea where government could potentially join forces with property owners to give property owners proper incentives in order to help their tenants on the pathway towards home ownership by providing education, mentoring them, giving institutional knowledge, perhaps even engaging in some kind of money sharing effort with benefit, with incentive. Greg Vassell of the Greater Boston Real Estate Board liked the idea. There were other panelists who liked it in general. I mean, we didn't go into too many specifics. I think we did talk about the potential for tax incentives, but could that be a way, as Marita was saying, to bring owners to the table, working cooperatively with government in a way that would benefit both the tenants and the owners and our communities?
Go ahead, Dimitri.
The rule of government is do no harm, right? And for the municipality, right, of the city, of the state, nation, what happens to a landlord under agreement with a party that can't close maybe for 6 months, or ties that landlord up for 6 months, and it's go up like we just saw? That is a venomous negative impact on the cap of that property, right? So if you put it, if you got tied up because you're waiting for your tenants and tie you up for as long as 6 months, and then your interest rates go up, I don't know, 3 points, you're not going to get the same value out of that as someone who wanted to come in and buy it right away. So you're interfering and you're negatively impacting a landlord, especially in a interest rate environment like this, number one. So I think that if you kind of step back and look at that, a lot of policies that are created are not necessarily well thought out by, I think they're well-meaning, but they're not people that look at the financial impacts of that, or go to a business person or go to a group think tank of business leaders and say, how could this hurt the landlord, or how could this hurt someone's personal financial well-being? And or they did and they just didn't care. But I mean, you're putting all of the onus and all of the problem on the landlord when it's not the landlord's fault. Is that the government is not doing a good enough job, with all due respect, at providing enough housing supply in a rapid manner in an environment that fosters development, that brings price possible, so that people can buy more. So it's limited supply that causes the price to go up. If we had 30,000 available apartments in Boston, rent prices would go down. So I mean, that's not a question, that's a fact, right? So it's supply and demand. It's the same thing with, if you have a vast amount of sale, if you have a vast amount of properties for sale, the price is going to go down. It's just supply and demand. So if government truly wants to be the solution to it, then you need to put, Anthony Robbins would say, put 90% of your effort on the solution. If you put 90% of effort into your solution, you're gonna figure that out, and it's gonna have a material impact. And I think that's we don't focus on the solution. The solution is supply. And I think Melvin, I think if we took a lot of these neighborhoods that are triple deckers and raise the height on that, and Marita said it very well, attics, basements, streamlined everything. I think government should have a landlord Sherpa, right? And it guides them through the entire process from beginning to end. Just like they have these tenants groups and everything else, they should grab the landlord and say, I'd love to help you develop your property to the highest and best use. We're going to give you tax credits. We're going to take you through every step. You don't understand this language? That's no problem. We're going to take care of that for you too. We're going to get it done. Let's get rapid supply. So I believe government used effectively can have a material impact, because ultimately everybody wants affordable housing for everybody. It's just how we get there. And I think that's, we have to start looking outside of our, traditional things. TOPA is not a solution. It never will be. It doesn't add supply. So it's just kind of noise out there, and it's not going to go anywhere, in my opinion, with all due respect.
I have something to add. And you, Demetrios, you said if we add 30,000 units, it's just a general thing, it will go down. What we all are forgetting is 2006, 7, and 8, when we had an abundance of property and the rental prices actually went down because we didn't have enough people in the market to consume or take over that property. So as I say earlier, and I said earlier, if we know our past, we'll know our future. So if we duplicate that, we'll go from there. But I also want to add to Amir's question about helping out tenants to buy, or getting them involved. That comes down to the city, number one. Also comes down working with the landlord and educating the landlord and letting them know that they could help out their tenant in many different ways. But the most important thing is when we have these local CDCs and these NDCs, they are neighborhood development corps or community development corps. They are the catch basin supposedly for those neighborhoods that they're in. They need to do a better job, and in turn reaching out to the local neighbors in their community catch basin and say, we have home buying programs that we can offer you, or programs that we can refer you to. The sad part about it is that a lot of these NDCs and CDCs, and whoever's going to listen to this, they'll be mad at me, and I don't care. They're all into development versus helping out their community, which was their main source and their main goal, and it's part of their charter, of all their charters. Okay. So it wasn't really, it's development, yes, because that's the key word, but their charter was to help out their community as well, to help create a better source or base for the community. So there is that program. Ironically, I have something in the works in regards to homeowners and tenants working together. And I'm almost done with it. And when I'm finished, I'll share it outright. And I was told to bring it to Lydia Edwards because she was working on something very similar, but mine will enhance what she was trying to work on something. So long story short is, or should I say Senator Lydia Edwards now, I have to make sure I do it properly because in case someone listened to this, but I'm here. I mean, but I hear it. And that's just my opinion. Tenants should be able to buy, but people need to help and guide them in the right direction.
Without interfering with anyone else's rights, of course.
Correct.
Right.
One thing I want to mention is eviction. People think that a tenant stops paying and then automatically if they're evicted. No, it's a long process. I mean, we try to work with the tenant. We give them notices. There's a 14-day notice, and we give them several opportunities before we reach the eviction process. So I think there's lack of knowledge about the whole process. So they need to understand the whole process. It's not as if tenant stops paying just once and then they're evicted. We want to push them up. No. We want to work with the tenant to so they can stay. And I think eviction is we need to elaborate what eviction means and what the process we need to go through. And a lot of people don't understand that.
It's a good point, Marita. You met, if you think back in the media a few years ago, they were like, there's going to be an eviction tsunami. And I had people call me, multiple people from the media, different news outlets. I said, there's going to be no eviction tsunami. And there wasn't, was there? And so, I mean, I don't know what, I mean, I mean, not everybody can get it right at all times, but I think that most people pay rent, and then there's just a few bad actors and bad actresses that don't pay their rent. But the issue is that the way that it's handled in the court system does not give a fair shake to the landlord, and I think that needs to change. And maybe it will over time. Maybe the pendulum swung too far in one direction, but and hopefully it just swings back and common sense is applied to matters. I mean, there are a few landlords out there that don't do a great job with their properties, and quite frankly, they should sell, and they should, think about being better landlords. But the vast majority of them are great landlords, and so I think it's on both sides of it. You've got a few bad actors, and it creates more of a impression that a problem than there is, if that makes sense. And it's just dealing with those specific issues. And I think if it's done in a common sense approach, overall, I think we have a great, the housing stock in Boston's never been better. I mean, in my personal opinion, and I think Jason brought up an excellent point. I was a renter longer than I was a homeowner, right? And you go through various shades of landlords, right? You go through different, you got a great landlord, an okay landlord, an out-of-state landlord, a big, small I've seen it all. You know, and I think you adapt to it and you work with what you have. And if you don't like it, you can always move to another apartment as well, or the choice in the marketplace, more room.
And with more supply, you would have more choices if we can get there. One last point or question: how long does the average eviction take? I know that a lot of owners end up foregoing the unpaid rent just to get possession back. But is it fair to say that the average eviction takes somewhere between 9 months and 1 year?
I think that could be a safe guess. You know, you're not seeing anyone evicted, and you're certainly not seeing in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days.
And during COVID, it was even longer. I know someone who's still 2 years now.
Wow.
I could say from asking the landlords in my group, the days I don't know exactly, but in terms of the amount of money the landlord lose, legal fees, uncollected rent, damages, repairs, and storage, and all that add together, average is $15,000 or more.
Wow.
That was like,
what did you just say?
15,000
For
eviction.
That's not including the rent, the lost rent.
That includes the rent. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Legal fee, uncollected rent, damages, storage, and the owner's time, and not to counting that, you know, just all that uncollected rent and everything together. The average is $15,000, not $1,500.
So if the prices remain the same,
Correct.
You have to evict them, and then cost of repair has gone up because it's taken so long, and it's cost you that amount of money. So your actual true loss is more than a year's probably worth of rent.
When a landlord per unit, you probably make $200-300. You know, if you manage it well. You know, some people may be making even more if your cost is lower, meaning, you know, if the leverage lower, you have less money borrowed. Otherwise, $200-300 per unit, that's how much people can make.
Yeah, I mean, the owner's time should be tax deductible. I mean, they have to go to court, they got to park, and good luck parking anywhere in the city of Boston for under $40.
Yeah, we don't get anything for free.
So you're paying for your attorney, you're losing your time at work. You can't go work at your job, so you're hamstrung at your work, and so like that should be tax deductible. I mean, whatever, you know, like you should be able to match it against what you earn in your W-2s and take the amount of time off that you had to go do these things and deduct it off your taxes, because you are working, you're just not getting paid, you're losing money.
So I'm just trying to, and I know the answer to this, but I'm playing Columbo right now and trying to pull this, because there are people who are going to listen to this again, and they're going to be like, what do you guys? So you're saying it's going to cost money to run a business, and most average landlords are maybe eight units, you said, Demetrios, and you divide up your portfolio, and that's just barely making it, and that's just barely being able to pay bills. So as I say, and I said earlier to everybody, and I said it earlier, that if we don't know our history or our past, we won't know our future, and we won't know how it's going to ripple down, affect our future. So when people say at one point, oh, Boston was so beautiful, or that house was so beautiful, they don't know why that house went downhill, because there are other extenuating circumstances that might have been taking place. Am I wrong in assuming that?
No, I don't think you see a ton of triple deckers going up anymore. You see really big, massive, once in a while properties getting developed. So it favors the larger developers. And really what you want to do is have a lot of small property owners that own property, so wealth is distributed more evenly across a broader swath of people. And so I think, because your immigrants love to buy real estate, and that's great for building wealth, and that's the American dream. So go back to the American dream. You know, we have to foster that. Now, if that's Marita buying a 3-family and she wants to add another story to it, make it easy for her. I think she can handle it. Same with Jason, same with anybody, same with Melvin, same with Amir. we have sensible to keep you to act. No one's going to retire off of apartments. Not going to happen because your cost structure is high, your insurance, all these things that you have to pay for, water, maintenance, and every 20 years you're going to gut that apartment. You're going to put a new kitchen in, new bathroom, new windows. You're always doing something to your property, Melvin, right? There are times your roof's you're going to do yard work, cleaning. There's always something popping up every single day that distracts you. I know something by the end of the day is going to distract you, you know, that needs to get addressed.
So Demetrios, so when you get older and you're now set on a fixed income, you're living on Social Security, but now you're using the rents from the place you owned, but those rents have remained here. You don't have that extra income. I'm just trying to figure out what happens to that landlord.
Well, I mean, imagine if someone did that to you in the stock market, Melvin. Right? I mean, if had like control, pretty upset. There's a lot of politicians that do really well with stocks, right? You know, poking fun at it. But yeah, sure, we're going to take, you know, we're going to cap your stock earnings. And where does it end? I think if everything had controls on it, wage and price controls across the board, all across America and the world, maybe that would work. But I don't see how that would work because something new always comes out and somebody wants it, and the marketplace of ideas supersedes that, right? So better iPhone equals, you know, you want to buy it or you don't, right? It's just, or you buy an Android phone, right? So you could go on forever, but are you going to put, you know, price controls on and so like, if you look at it, it's kind of silly, right? To say, well, we're just going to target these small landlords or these landlords because they're the problem. It doesn't add up.
And poor Marita here that she wants to put another
Yeah.
10 in, and they're stopping her. And then if what gets me, Amir, is that they're stopping her now. Then when she finally gets it going, if this other thing that comes through, now the amount of money she thought she was going to be able to make, she's going to be limited if she's caught in that same wave. And so, Marita, you're going to feel how?
Well, you know what? We tried to legalize the same apartment 20 years ago in East Boston, and the issue back then was parking. And now there's all this development taking place, and there are new rules. So,
Jason, what about you? The same thing? I know. I bet you have the same stories.
No, we don't do much of the development, but parking is always an issue everywhere you go. It's still there. I mean, still the reason that you know, being brought up against any development.
And I agree with you. And I also appreciate the way you hit home the point about how rent control hinders people from building generational wealth, passing down the fruits of their hard work to their children. I think it's important for people to realize that. In addition, before closing up, I first want to thank all of you for being on the panel today. It was a wonderful conversation. I know that there was still a lot that we couldn't get to. We didn't have time to get to it, but there will be future episodes where we discuss other matters in addition to what we highlighted today with regard to the perspectives of property owners from immigrant and diverse communities. I want to remind people to please donate to SPOA at www.spoa.com/join. For those of you watching, if you feel that the American dream is compromised, whether you are an immigrant or whether your family has been in this country for a long time, SPOA will fight day and night to preserve the American dream. But we need you to join us in this fight because we have to come up with constructive housing solutions that benefit tenants, owners, and all stakeholders alike. And SPOA is definitely committed to that cause. So we look forward to seeing you again. My name is Amir Shahsavari, and until next time, I wish you well.